Hello, and
yeah, if you don't start clapping, we'll just keep making dumb noises in the microphone.
Hi, everyone.
welcome to Comics vs. Games 2, Bit Bazaar, TCAF, etc., etc. This is our second Comics vs. Games, and we've greatly expanded thanks to our new sponsor, Bento Miso, who also put together the Bit Bazaar. Also, big thanks to Attract Mode, who put together the amazing gallery downstairs, which you should really check out. And thanks to TCAF for involving indie games in their programming and supporting us in doing a lot of crazy shit over the years. So, first, who I am and why the hell I'm on stage. I'm going to be moderating these jokes. I mean, these wonderful people.
Yay.
I'm Miguel Sternberg. I'm part of the Hand-Eye Society. We do a lot of indie game programming around the city. There's some of the cool events we've done before, including TCAF. So part of the things I do is organize stuff like this. But I'm also half of Spooky Squid Games. We have a game downstairs called They Bleed Pixels. It involves a small girl stabbing things in the face with claws. I think you'll all enjoy it. You should go check it out.
Great Mother's Day gift.
So I'm going to have you guys introduce yourselves, and I've got some random slides, embarrassing photos, etc. To show.
Perfect.
What?
I'm Benjamin Rivers, and I'm an indie game designer and a comic artist here in Toronto. And last year I created an indie horror game called Home, which is out on Steam. And it made a lot of people poop their pants. Both, yep. Really, I think so. That's what I've been told. And I also do comics, like serious comics about the city, and I did this book called Snow, which is all about Queen Street West. It's like a weird little murder mystery, super melodramatic historical drama. And yeah, I go and talk to people about poop and drama. So
there's Snow.
That's cool.
And there's Snow the video game, which you didn't mention.
Oh yeah, right, because I'm hungover. So I also made a video game version of Snow, which is like a little 5-minute adventure where you go down Queen Street West and get to go into the store where the main character works, which, if you're from Toronto, you would know is secretly Page's bookstore, which is no longer with us.
I was secretly in Scott Pilgrim, too.
Yeah. So it's, yeah, it's a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Sweet.
Okay,
Give it up for Ben.
next.
Woo. Oh,
Thanks. Go, Scott.
Hey, I'm Scott Campbell, and I was art director at Doublefine Productions on Psychonauts and Brutal Legend. I was there for a while, so I was in games for quite some time. But now I'm freelance doing children's books and comics. I did Doublefine Action Comics, was something I did like on the website there. That we have our little comics that we did at Doublefine as well. And Great Showdowns is something that I do on Tumblr. And that's about.
That's who you is.
That's my breakdown. You guys.
Woo.
Awesome.
So I'm Jim Zub. I'm a local Toronto comic creator and video game guy. I've been working at the Udon studio for the past 10 years, and we've done all sorts of work on Street Fighter, and I've been doing work recently for Bandai Namco games. We've done all kinds of stuff, including Wonder Momo here. You see on the Shifty Look Bandai site. I'm also a comic creator. I've got a series running at Image right now called Skullkickers, which is sort of like kind of like a buddy cop movie meets Conan, or like The Hobbit meets The Hangover. It's deep stuff. So I'm doing comics. I'm doing some game art stuff or game related comics as well, and having a good time doing it. It's good fun. This guy.
Wow.
Hi. That was louder now. I'm Bryan Lee O'Malley. I did a comic book called Scott Pilgrim, and also a video game of it, and there was a movie of it too. I'm from Toronto, but I live in the States now. Sorry.
Sorry.
But I think we made the only side-scrolling Toronto fighting game so far, probably.
That's a fair assessment, I'd say.
But it won't be the last.
There was supposed to be a DLC where we went to Montreal, but Ubisoft cut the budget, so we didn't get to do that.
Oh.
But I couldn't even imagine Montreal as a side-scrolling fighter, so I'm glad it didn't happen.
Woo!
So we all know sort of like how you're related to comics and video games in your working life, but what is your sort of relationship to them personally? Like, what games do you play? What comics do you read? Do you actually have time
You're
to play
assuming we have a life. That's
Yeah,
a
I know.
foolish assumption.
Okay, 5 years ago or 10 years ago when you had time to play games.
Where did it all begin?
Nice. Who wants to start?
What was your first video game?
Was my first video game?
Video game?
Dun, dun, dun. I mean, I was playing...
How old are you?
I'm an
old
old
people?
man.
You guys are both older than me. I
I'm
think.
36, unfortunately. No, so...
This is the only reason I came here is to find out how old
That's
Scott
good.
is.
Scott,
I am quite old. Quite old.
how old are you, son?
Wait, are we doing ask the first question?
When,
How old are you?
We're not listening
When
to
did
his
Psychonauts
questions.
come
We
out?
wanna know your
didn't it
age.
come out in like 1991? Come on.
A long time ago, you guys. I started working in games in '96.
Wow.
So you're now, what, 21?
you look-
good.
You look so good.
Yeah.
You're so good looking.
Great. I'm glad we're starting out with these questions. It's great.
No, so early games. I mean, I grew up on Atari and Dungeons and Dragons,
Yeah.
tabletop, and reading lots of comics. The first sort of manga stuff. I mean, I would watch like Star Blazers or G-Force. Do you guys know what that is? Anyone? Science Ninja Team, Gotcha Man. So I grew up on those cartoons, which would eventually, I didn't know they were Japanese cartoons, and eventually I would get into the first sort of thing that I knew that was Japanese influence was I would read the Adam Warren would do the Dirty Pair comics. They were coming out through Eclipse at the time, and I was reading those, and I thought those were really, really cool, which led to a love of manga. So between Dungeons & Dragons and Atari and Nintendo and manga, I'm like a proto-nerd. Like, I'm just covering all the bases of nerdity. What about you? You're like
I started with that.
Vectrex.
No. Well, the Star Wars video game is my first favorite one
Yeah?
in the arcades and stuff, and I still love it.
Yeah.
What? Both, man. I'll try both. I'm down with both.
Sweet.
I was into that, and I had my Atari. And Atari was actually the last system I had, all the way till the Wii. because my family's like, you don't need a new one. So I'm, well, my friends have this new thing, Nintendo, and my mom's like, you already have Atari. So I had to stick with Atari forever.
You just kept playing Haunted House, and the little eyes would
Yeah,
just
and never
bounce.
changed.
Yeah.
But we used to do the thing where my brother and I, we'd line up all of our Atari cartridges, and then we would put a big piece of paper out, and we would draw like arcade machines, represent each cartridge, and we'd put it next to the TV and pretend that we're like in this arcade, our own arcade and stuff. And it worked so good.
That's amazing.
Worked so good.
That's pretty amazing, actually.
That's
But yeah.
funny. Yeah, 'cause I used to draw my Atari cartridges too. Like the art on them was like
Yeah.
it would stick in my mind, and I would like
Yeah.
draw them.
I would draw
Yeah,
the
that's so
original
rad.
Mega Man, the characters in the instruction booklet. I would just redraw them, and then I would come up with other ones.
Right.
And of course, they were going to make them. Like in my mind, they were going to make more.
Oh yeah, no, I made up so many Mega Man guys.
Yeah, Mega Man
Like
guys
grade
and,
six.
and levels for Battletoads. I would make new
that's
things
crazy.
for the
That's very
original
ambitious.
Battletoads. I was like, God, that was such a cool game, and I could never finish it. So I was like,
Nobody
this is
can.
how the ending should go, because I'll never see it.
Why not?
I beat it.
Did
No.
you?
Yeah,
What?
grade 6.
I don't
yeah.
believe it.
Well, I don't believe you
I
either.
did. I did.
What, did you have
love
Nintendo
it,
Power with like a strategy guide?
No,
or
I didn't.
something?
I probably did.
Yeah, you
I think I had.
probably
I
did.
think I had.
No one
I
could've
think I
beat
had
that
tips.
game. Yeah,
But still, it's
didn't
like
beat games.
the tips don't give you everything. Like
game's
you have
hell.
to actually like power through.
You
and
can't. That's not a game you
memorize
can
a lot of shit.
intellectually get through. You
No,
have
that
to-
game is
No, you
hell.
have to like
Yeah.
actually just
Yeah.
keep playing it forever, which I did. I didn't have anything to
good.
do. I didn't have a
That's
job.
So, games.
In television was first for me.
In television.
old too?
Yeah, Advanced
We're
Dungeons
all
and Dragons and
Yeah.
television was the best. And I
played
used to
D&D
draw.
champions.
I used to do full game design documents of Intellivision games because every television game had the same dude. It was the little television man running, and every game, whether it was soccer or D&D, it was always the
God.
same animation. So I had
You
this
were,
like.
reverse engineering games at that age.
I was lonely.
Photo nerds.
But I would do I did like a River City Ransom style game with
Right.
Intellivision graphics. It
That's-
was like
I
going
would
on the
do-
mean streets of
I do
whatever.
pixel art on graph paper. I would just
Yeah.
that's that many squares.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. And then when Super Nintendo comes out, I go, that's too many fucking squares.
Yeah.
I can't do that anymore.
Yeah, that's-
Kids are still doing that because I go look on DeviantArt and there's like They Bleed Pixels things where like a kid is like hand
That is the
copied the,
best-
pixel
that
art.
is-
Yeah.
I've seen
On
so
graph
many
paper?
from the
That
Scott
is
Pilgrim
pure
game.
awesome.
So
Yeah.
many, and
I
like
need to make
tattoos.
something
and,
pixelated so someone can send it back to me. That
Right.
would make me
On
feel-
graph
Someone will
paper in
embroider it.
pencil.
Yeah.
What's that?
Embroidered pixel art.
Yes.
is fun.
Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
crocheted.
I didn't even
So-
really answer the question, but it was
You wanna go?
pretty much the same.
Pretty much the same.
I played Atari and Nintendo, and my first comics were Transformers comics.
Oh, sweet.
Nice.
Because I lived up north. I lived in North Bay, I think, and Timmins in North Bay.
Did they have Nintendo there?
Yes,
I heard
they
of it
did.
on-
Eventually, I got the Nintendo really late. I got it like late '89, Christmas '89, I think.
Right.
So I think it came out like '87 or something.
So the usual sort of comparison that's made between games and other mediums is always film. Like that's always what people sort of go to when they want to make comparisons. But with comics, there's actually a lot of sort of comics iconography that's ended up in games, from word bubbles to all of the sort of emotive icons and such. Why do you think that like so much has been borrowed by games in terms of
Here's
comic
one,
language?
because games never used to talk. So it was just like images and words, and that's the same language as comics. So that made sense to me. Like as a kid, they were kind of like they were linked that way because the dialogue in like Ninja Gaiden was like just typed on the screen, and it's just in your head.
Yeah.
And that's like the same way I would read a comic.
It had the same amount of motion as a comic in the Ninja Gaiden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
Super
like the speed
monotone.
line.
And you
Yeah,
just
yeah.
Kind of, yeah.
There was a simplistic graphic quality, I think, especially to those early games. So you see that a lot in the pixel art, where the graphic component seems very much in sync, where it's not about tons and tons of rendering in detail. It's more about very broad brushstroke kind of
Yeah.
iconography. Exactly
Yeah,
that.
yeah, like Final Fantasy, like whatever,
Right.
The Super Nintendo ones were
Absolutely.
like reading like a huge comic. Like
Yeah,
it's
totally.
just like these simplified, cute characters that you kind of build up in your own
Except
mind.
that one battle you can't finish, so it's like you can't turn the fucking page. You just can't beat that guy.
I beat Final Fantasy 6. Come on. Who are you?
I think in special effects too. I mean, you have to show people like all the different like their health and all like when they're hit and all that stuff. And borrowing that from comics, you have to show that too, like what it sounds like when
all-
someone hits someone's face.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. You want to know when that happens in a comic. It seems like it's the same
even
thing.
the strike animations and stuff, you'd get those little bursts. I mean, those feel very
Yeah, like
comic
that's how I
booky.
learned how to draw those too, though, because like
Yeah.
people our age, we just kind of intermingle them. I think.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it was all just. Well, that was the weird thing about it. It wasn't to me like games were separate from comics or comics were separate from cartoons, or they all just felt like in toys. Like it all just felt like imaginative stuff. And if one was good, then the other could be good, and you just kind of mushed it all together. In our, when you're a kid, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
A kid will bring you a toy, and they'll tell you a story that they made, and here's the drawing of the toy, and it's all relative, So.
Yeah, I think a lot of, especially like in Japanese comics, it had a very long history of iconography that's been there
absolutely.
forever and
Yeah.
still is used. And especially because, in the 80s and all that stuff, most of the games that we were playing were Japanese, they borrowed that stuff wholesale because they had that to work with. And you play like a Final Fantasy and you can recognize the sad little marionette doll and the
The
happy
guy,
one. And
they'll
they
do
do
the little teardrop.
yeah, and they'll
thing,
do
yeah.
a spin, and like one of my favorite games is Persona 4. As if anyone needs to hear me talk about that anymore, but that still uses the exact same iconography from all the games from like the early '80s, and it still works because you communicate, you get everything, and you know what it means.
Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's definitely something that stuck around even after it was no longer like absolutely necessary
Yeah,
for.
Well, Metal
You can
Gear,
do super
Metal Gear
detailed
still
stuff,
uses
but-
an exclamation point,
Well, it's
and
now an artistic and a stylistic choice rather than like an artistic need. I
Right.
think, which is
Right.
kind of cool.
It's a pop culture thing too. I mean, people feel good when they see that. And
yeah.
Well, someone pointed out that to the majority of kids nowadays, they'll see that little disc symbol for save your game.
Yeah.
They don't make those fucking discs. No one
Yeah,
knows
no
what
one-
those look like
Yeah.
anymore. But a kid will know that that's a saved thing. That's how you save a game, is that little chunky disc symbol.
Right.
Even though they don't use them and have never had them, and
Yeah.
they have never seen one or held one.
I want to go to a grade school with the like 500 of those diskettes I still have
Yeah.
in my house and blow all of them mine.
They're like, that's a real thing. That's not just a box with a box on it. Like, that's a thing. And that means save your game,
I thought
Record
they were more
scratch,
like cubes.
Right? Like, it's fascinating. Because I forget who pointed that out, and all of a sudden I realized, I go, oh, you're right.
Yeah.
Shit.
It-
Like, that's kind of crazy.
So something I've started to notice is like as well as like the stuff that was like borrowed from comics, games also have grown their own iconography, whether it's like the 3 hearts for losing hearts or health bars, numbers falling out of shit when it's being hit, all of that stuff. And that stuff's started to come back into comics, like obviously with Scott Pilgrim, but I've seen it in other places. And I'm wondering, is that like, especially with everyone sort of growing up with video game culture as part of their culture, are those icons going to start to become just a standard part of comics language?
But I think those borrow from tabletop role-playing games. So the idea of numbers falling, literally hit points.
Yeah. Right, yeah.
That's Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Right.
Even the health bar stuff.
But someone visualized it, and
Yeah.
and then it became like weird, but we all accepted it.
Well, it was weird because if it was green, it meant you were healing it, and if it was white, it meant
Right.
you were losing it. Like weird
But it
stuff
made
like
sense,
that.
like instantly.
Well, there's also a sound that goes with it as well. So it's like the chunky, and then if it's good, it's like, you know,
Yeah.
no, that's good sound, sparkle sound, you know, or whatever. So, man, I wish they had that in real life. Just like, play a sound, you
good
feel
sound.
good.
You know,
good
you know when
sound.
you've done well, you hear the sparkle sound.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be great.
I would actually love that in my life. Just every time I made a good decision, like you'd
Sparkle
immediately know,
sound. Yeah.
okay, that was the right thing to do.
You're at a store and you see something you want, it goes da-na-na-na,
Yeah.
and you're like, whoa, that'd be so
Yeah.
good.
But in terms of those symbols, do you think that they're going to become part of like standard comics language as they're entering into more and more comics?
I think you'll see more people. Sorry, I think
yeah,
you'll
go
see more
ahead.
people mixing and matching stuff. As
Yeah.
like for us, that was something that we learned as kids that like our parents didn't understand, but eventually we brought onto the world, and now everyone just knows it. So
Yeah.
for
Yeah, I
them
think
to
it
not use it
becomes
would be weird. I think to a lot of people.
ubiquitous.
I'm sure there's kids who've read Scott Pilgrim but not played any old video games that I played that inspired Scott Pilgrim. So it's going to be interesting to see where that goes.
Right.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about this the other day. Like when I started Scott Pilgrim, I didn't set out to make like a video game trope comic necessarily, but I wanted to do fighting. And then when I started drawing the first fight scene, I was like, the only fighting I know in my life is from Street Fighter. So I just started like Googling Street Fighter images.
I always thought you were a gang kid and you were, no.
No, so it's like I just started doing all that. I was like, oh, fighting is like when you do like counters and like all that shit. So I just started throwing all that stuff in, and then it just kind of ballooned from there. It's just all I knew.
Well, I think what's fascinating, though, is how iconic it is, how instantaneous people recognize, whether it's the life bar stuff or whether it's the free lives or any of those things. It's a touchstone now for people, for them to recognize or to understand other elements or the visual shortcuts that people can just instantly cue into. So it's cool. I mean, it's fascinating. Now with remix culture, everything's up for grabs. And the more sort of insular or kind of everyone wants to sort of play this like inner baseball where the more weird or the more obscure the reference, the better it can be. Because then it's like we're in a secret club and now you know that thing that I was referencing from that other thing, you know, and stuff like that.
So one thing though is like you, Jim, specifically have done like a ton of adaptations of video games into comics, and I haven't, at least with the stuff on Shifty Look that I've looked through, I haven't seen you use any of those symbols. Was that a deliberate choice?
Yeah, essentially, I mean, Bandai Namco hired the Udon studio. It was one of the weirdest experiences I've ever had because they hired us. They said, we've got this huge IP library, and most of our video game IPs are 20, 30 years old. And so they wanted us to go back and say there were properties that hadn't been used. So Bravo Man hasn't been used in 25 years, and Wonder Momo is, I think, 24 years old. And they sort of said, what's viable now? Or, is there a new take on it? But Bandai Namco is a huge company. They do toys. They own Sunrise, the anime company. They do video games. They do toys. They do multimedia. And so they didn't want us to. They wanted us to take retro properties and update them. So for the example of Wonder Momo, when it came out, I think it was literally only on the TurboGrafx. The arcade version never came out, and it's like an idol girl who's sort of a ripoff of Ultraman, who's a bit of a ditz, and she fights aliens
On a stage.
On a stage, it's weird. So in the game, it did okay in Japan, and the characters sort of got a bit of a culty status, but it did nothing in North America because there was no anime culture really at that time. Now it's like so appropriate. Like everyone knows what an idol is, and everyone knows that Sailor Moon style kind of stuff, and they know Ultraman, and so
They know
all
what
these
stages.
They know all the stages. They know what stages. But all those
Theodore has finally come to North America.
right, all those anime tropes that would have just been bizarre are now kind of weird and cool and kitschy. And so we just took those elements and kind of amped them up. Rather than having to play up the video game elements, we sort of said we're going to take the schoolgirl anime elements. So, you know, whereas Klonoa is another one I'm doing, which is kind of a culty game. They've done a bunch of them in Japan, but they've only released 2 here. And again, it was more about let's tell a great story. But that's also because I think Bandai Namco wants to, I mean, hopefully they're going to take these strips and they want to do new toys, new animation, new games.
Hopefully a new game for Wonder Momo. 'cause
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, the
not
original game's kind of awful,
good.
but it, you know, so all of these things were more about adapting and trying to make them as new reader friendly rather than kind of going insular with them. That was a deliberate choice in that way. Yeah.
Okay, so this is sort of one of the bigger questions. So I know because I've got a big paragraph that I'm not actually going to read out to you.
But how will we know what the question is?
Okay.
Okay, do it.
All right.
Yes. We're ready.
I would never touch
So there's
them there.
like a sort of ongoing conversation in game dev circles of whether or not games are any good at all for telling stories. Like whether we're making a huge mistake by trying to do heavily narrative games.
Can I jump in?
Oh, I know you're gonna. Like we've had this conversation. But most of the games that do try to tell a story, they try to sort of keep the game stuff separate. Like the way that they sort of solve that problem is like they don't mention the fact that like your character's leveling up or that you did X amount of damage.
Or in
It's
Metal
all
Gear
just
Solid,
killed
you're going to be
800
watching.
people.
Right.
Metal Gear Solid, you're going to watch 45 minutes of cinema scene, and then you'll get to push the joystick, and then you get 20 minutes of.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, although I'm actually going to bring it up on the other side of that as well, because it's a weird game
Yeah,
when
yeah.
it comes to this like narrative stuff. So yeah, the usual sort of technique is to try to sort of mimic movies and just kind of hide all the stats and all the gamey stuff away. But with something like Scott Pilgrim, you managed to basically take all of that gamey stuff, put it at the forefront, and use it as like a metaphor for telling like a really human story. And so I'm wondering whether, like, by trying to hide all of the game stuff, games are actually doing sort of a disservice to themselves, and that maybe that we should be accepting that and sort of having the characters comment on the game part more deliberately. In some games,
You're asking
that would be
essentially
awesome.
what elements are game and what elements are story? Or?
well, maybe like should we be blending the two more and not sort of going like story is a separate thing, and then like there's this game thing that's happening, but it's not really connected in a sort of like it's usually like when it's done, it's seen as like a fourth wall breaking thing, like.
Yeah.
In Metal Gear Solid, when there's a point where a character points to the fact they've got a bandana, and you know that means they've got infinite ammo, and they don't need to have any of the ammo they're carrying. And that's seen as sort of like being kind of fourth wall breaking and gimmicky, but maybe it isn't. Maybe the actual way that games should be telling stories is to be totally open and clear.
What's your goal,
Transparency.
Scott? Like, what's your goal when you were at Doublefine, when you guys were doing game or story elements? Like, what's
Well,
like
he was-
Brutal Legend or something?
Well, I mean, Tim is always trying to, like we were talking about, trying to blend it as much as possible, so you feel like you're getting all the information you need without having too much interface stuff. So you just feel like you get a feel for everything. So it's definitely more that style. But I mean, I think both ways. I mean, I think that's pretty amazing too.
So is it like on a story gameplay balance? Where does you think that you fall or Tim falls or?
Oh man, a balance. I think it's a pretty good balance.
Yeah.
No, I think because he has like a lot of different ways to for you to kind of get to know the characters and get to know the story, like extra like things that you could pick up that could tell you kind of like a little bit the backstory of things. Like you can unravel what's happening. But the actual gameplay sometimes kind of can show you about what the characters are like or kind of learn a little bit about them. But it's mostly very story driven for sure. But it's also like very much like open where you can kind of explore and have a good time as opposed to maybe a game that you're on a track and you're kind of experiencing it and you're doing what you can, but you're still kind of pulled along this kind of story and stuff. But yeah, that's our style.
So, well, I could talk about this for 2 hours, but yeah, I'm son of a. It's a huge question. I think it's only been in the past, I think, several years that people have started to finally just let go and stop trying to make things the way they were as far as games go. And you see a lot more games that use metaphor as gameplay or story as gameplay elements. Like with my game, the whole game is the story. There's no gameplay. if you think about it in a traditional way. All you're doing is revealing a story, but that is the entire gameplay. And you kind of don't know what's going on until you go through it. And a lot of people call me an idiot for that on the forums. But that's okay, because I've already got their money. But there is a lot more to be said about games that don't have any separation at all. And in fact, like the total anti-Metal Gear sort of approach. In fact, I just finally played through the entirety of Flower on my PS3 like a week ago. And to me, that game has more story, gameplay, narrative, cohesion, brilliance than almost anything I've played in the past couple of years. It doesn't say anything. It literally does not say a word. You just have to sort of pay attention, and it's not asking you to do anything. It's not asking you to come up with this amazing answer to some mysterious question. You just go and you bring to it what you want, and by the end of it, what you experience is exactly what you put into it. So whatever you got out from the narrative, what they're showing you visually, like if you aren't thinking about it, then there's no story there. So to me, there's like a perfect harmony there, and I think we're seeing a lot more stuff related to that. It's not always necessarily gimmicky or like really like abstract, but that's the stuff I find really interesting. Not just like how could you make a better cutscene, or how could you sort of like get the balance between when somebody's talking and you don't get to play, and vice versa. As far as I'm concerned, when I'm in a game, I'm all in as far as story goes. And as soon as you start telling me too much stuff and I'm not there projecting, then you're removing story from me. So it's a tricky thing, because it's not like you can't, there's no check mark on a list you can tell someone about that. You just have to trust that they will come to your game and jump in. And I think people do it all the time. So
I think the reality is games are a medium, comics are a medium, and so you're going to get the full range. And I think that's what's fascinating about it, is that the desire of the creator will come through in the product. So your personal balance of where you feel gameplay should fall on that story scale, or where story should fall on that gameplay scale, is going to reflect itself in the product. You know, the more people that are involved on a AAA game, the homogenization process is very clear, because you need to try, when you're spending millions of dollars, you need to appeal to as wide a market as possible to get that money back, or at least try to. So you need to make it as safe and as simple and as straightforward as possible. So the stories are simple, and you're not asking for very much out of the players, or the experience is very, kind of sugar laden, like good things. See, keep playing, for God's sake, give us $50, or whatever. Right. Whereas with an indie game, I think you can strike out into areas where they wouldn't dare on a big budget game, because they just can't take that kind of risk. But if you're a small group or an individual, you can say, actually, I think this game will be like just fucked. Like, we're just going to go wide, and we're going to try something no one else has tried. And if we fail, at least we went there, rather than worrying about the profitability per se.
Yeah.
So
I think there are games that were made. There's a Toe Jam, which is an event that happens every year here in Toronto. It was just last weekend. And some of the games I saw coming out of that, to be honest, were far more sophisticated narrative-wise than anything that's come out of the AAA space in like the last 10 years. And they were 3-day jams, probably because everyone was totally sleep-deprived and just stuff happens. But seeing things you go, that is the best idea I've ever heard. Why has it taken us 30 years to get
it's
here?
Fearless, yeah. Well, but I think that like Scott Pilgrim is a very personal, it is ridiculous and obviously over the top, but your personality is fueled so deeply into that thing in the same kind of way, because it's you as an individual rather than a team of people. If Oni Press gave you the ability to do that thing, you couldn't have taken that to a huge publisher and they'd have been like, okay, so it's a video game, music, fighting, romance.
Yeah, no, I had the space to kind of be creative and weird. But then I was thinking about like when we did the game of Scott Pilgrim, like most of my job on that game was to be like, let's have less story. let's just convey all the story through punching. Because originally there was gonna be like a lot more cutscenes and stuff, and I was not into it. And so we made it as minimal as possible. And it's not telling the exact same story as the comics. It's like a weirder story that's like very vague.
Yeah.
And
but people bring that too.
Exactly. Because you need to supply your own imagination, and I think that's a big part of what I liked about games growing up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't fill in all the.
I just played BioShock Infinite, which has I think 100% disconnect between story and gameplay, and it's fun and the story is interesting, but it didn't mesh for me ever, and I felt like I was playing two different games.
I find it really funny too, where you're playing a game. Someone was talking about the new Tomb Raider, and depending on how you play that, you're a killing machine.
I was a killing machine.
Right, but then the character starts off very kind of tepid and unsure. But then once you get the joystick, you're like, well, now I'm a fucking killing machine.
Yeah.
So the disconnect between the story, it's not like they could make her timid. You'd be annoyed. You're like, why aren't you responsive? Shoot that guy.
Yeah.
So it's like the story is fighting against what your desire is to be a badass.
That game worked better for me than BioShock, though.
Really?
Overall, on the connection level.
Yeah.
Even though I killed 200 guys during that game, I still felt like I felt Lara Croft's arc.
Oh, that's cool.
Her arc towards killing 200 guys.
She's like, I'm really remorseful for the first two, and then, well, there's just more of the same.
It gets easier after.
Yeah. By the end, she's just licking blood
like
off the barrel of the gun, and nothing matters
Just takes
anymore.
practice.
There's a really great, ridiculous word for that disconnect. It's ludonarrative dissonance.
Ludonarrative dissonance.
Ludo-
My favorite
Narrative
word.
Yeah.
dissonance.
Whoa.
It's such a fun word.
Now
Let's
you
all
can
talk
say
about
you
it. Everyone
learned
in the
something
audience,
today.
say with me.
That was good.
Ludonarrative dissonance.
I will never say that word.
Which one is that? What you're talking about?
Is that all one word, or is that multiple words?
It's two words.
Oh,
it's like
between
ludonarrative
right.
dissonance.
Gotcha.
Is there hyphens?
I think there might be a hyphen between ludo and narrative.
Ludonarrative is one word.
Wow.
It's the name of my new math rock band. Come see us next week at the Drake.
I want it when the video for this comes up. I want that to flash on the bottom of the screen. Now it's gonna be good.
So I'm going to go back to Brutal Legend, because I was going to bring that up as a counterpoint to the idea of sort of like being really obvious about the gaminess in a story. Because I feel like it does feel really cohesive in Brutal Legend, even though it doesn't. Like, they are separate, but they feel cohesive in a way that's completely hidden from the player.
Yeah. Metal brings everything together.
That it could just be that metal brings everything
Metal
together.
binds.
But I'm curious, like, with some of the story elements, did it start with the gameplay and then, like, Tim and you guys sort of figured out a way to make the story go that way? I'm thinking of, like, the ability for Eddie to fly. The way that that's introduced narratively ends up becoming really important to the arc of the game.
Right, yeah.
But obviously it was there so that you could navigate the sort of strategy elements.
Right. Yeah, I think I mean everything is that he puts in there is for is means to an end. I mean everything's very useful, and he kind of like, I mean there's a disconnect, and we're always kind of like battling Tim on cutscenes, because he definitely has a lot of cutscenes in his games, but he also tries a lot to incorporate that into like dialogue and things as you're doing adventures and stuff like that. But I don't know. I think it's. Oh man, I'm lost my.
But sort of was the world and the story arc sort of decided first, and then the gameplay was tweaked, or was it gameplay first, or was it sort of in?
I think
concert?
it goes hand in hand and stuff.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think there's a basic framework, the basics ideas of what we wanted to do, and then writing the backstory and kind of developing it as you go. Like whatever we put in there, like with the wings or something, and try to figure out like what that happens and like why that happens because of the backstory, and then that kind of develops into its own thing. And then there's because it opens up all kinds of doors when you start write a story around everything. Like you really think about why the characters have all these things, and it like all of a sudden can hold this axe when you didn't before, or whatever. Like if you really think about like the reason why all those things happen, and then write a story behind it, it could be really fun. I don't know. I think it's a pretty fun thing.
It definitely works
to experience when it's like that. But.
So with some of the weird characters and stuff in that, did that come from sort of you doodling stuff and showing it and going like, what if there was something like this? Or was it more the other way where like there was a request for like this unit needs to do these things? What should it look like?
A little bit of both. I mean, I think in the beginning it was just like the dream time when you just draw as many things that you'd want to have in a heavy metal world, a heavy metal game or something like that. You just draw as many things as you can, and then the designers would try to pick out some of these things and be like, oh man, we can make this guy do these things, you know. But then other times it'd be like, oh, we just need this guy driving a car and has like some sort of projectile weapon, and then you're like, okay, and then you have to figure out how that incorporates into that world. So yeah, make that thing metal and stuff. And then sometimes there's just story elements that Tim will come up with things. We have to have Ozzy here with the bat body or something, and then we have to figure out what he does.
Whatever the process was, it worked really well, because that game, like on paper, should be like the most cliche-looking thing ever. Like it's a video game with like a heavy metal aesthetic, and yet it feels really fresh and original. It's like,
if you guys haven't seen, there's an art book for for Brutal Legend that he's got at TCAF. It's this big, it's the size of a record album, but it's huge and thick. It's just filled with amazing concept art and designs. It is like metal madness. It's amazing stuff.
Yeah, you
It's
can
so
put
good.
it in with your record collection, and it looks nice in there. Perfect fits.
So sort of going to the ludonarrative dissonance thing, now that everyone knows the word, one way that I've been seeing that sort of be solved in Japan and also influence comics is there seems to be sort of almost a genre of comics there of sort of the game of death. Like it started with like something like Battle Royale. Like there's basically game rules, and then they tell a story inside those game rules. But then there's been a bunch of manga I've seen since then, and there's games that then feel like that also. The World Ends With You sort of feels like that. There's a game called 999 on the DS that also has it's these sort of like
Games about games. Sort
yeah
of.
games about like you can see why it works because you've got the game rules and then you're playing inside the game rules and then they just add a narrative to that, and so it's fine for the player and the characters in the world to be commenting on the game because they're in this game that's going to kill them.
I think
I just watched the movie The Game.
Oh, the game, yeah.
It's really good. It's about a game.
Nice.
This reminded me of that.
You also see games where you'll have you're in the game world and then they have a card game in the game world, or you go gambling in the game world. You're just like, this is super like meta weird.
They do that in every game now. Like
Yeah.
Assassin's Creed 3, I was like asked to play cards with like 50 people like before I even got to the first mission, and I was like, I don't want to play cards. I want to kill people.
I'm here to be an assassin. No, you're here to be a
remember,
card-playing
Final
assassin.
Fantasy 9 was like the first game I remember with
Yeah.
like a card game in the world,
Right.
and it was like
It's like every
pretty
game's
fun,
got
but like now it's every game.
now every
Yeah.
game's got inner Pokemon going on. It's
Yeah.
like fucking weird.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that works in some games, and in others you're just like, why is
Or
this here?
collectible element, or
Every game has a collectible.
Yeah.
Like Tomb Raider, I had to collect so many things.
the skulls of your enemies. Like what is
No, like every area had its own special collectible, and you'd find them accidentally, and it would be like, you need 10 more, and I'd be like, what? I don't want to do that.
is this World of Warcraft?
And I
What
had
is this
to
shit? Yeah.
because I was obsessed. They hook you. It's Stockholm syndrome.
Do you know
I
the only
feel
one
like that's
the only
the
one
main
that made
thing.
me laugh about that was I played Just Cause 2, and they would have all these like, so they would have all their stuff you had to collect, but then they also had like, okay, you have to take the plane and crash it off this building, like all these ridiculous over the top. So you're like, well, I don't mind doing that. That sounds kind of awesome.
The Skate
actually.
series was good for that.
Yeah.
Like you have to break all like the different bones in your body and stuff. That's great.
I think we're getting a little off topic. So games within games. Why are they doing this? I think.
And also comics that basically are about games.
But I think the game culture, you got to keep in mind, so games are now bigger than music, they're bigger than movies, they're bigger than toys. It's the biggest, for dollars, the biggest medium in the world. Bigger than, like, Halo's opening was
So
bigger
actually
than the
only-
Avengers opening.
I think for films, they're still only bigger than box office. They're not
Right.
bigger than the entire
than
film
home video.
industry.
But you're still talking about it is now permeated into our culture in every single way. So the way, but here's what I thought about this a lot. We talked about this in other contexts. Our culture now, so movies are everywhere. There's movies for the elderly. There's movies for adults. There's movies for teenagers. There's movies for kids. There's movies for toddlers, whatever. But we're the first generation, us old fucks. We're the first generation that grew up with video games. And as we retire, yes, there's articles and they'll show like grandma plays Halo every so often on the BBC or something. But for the most part, we're the generation that's going to grow old with video games. So the medium has still got room to grow. And we're now the dominant money people who are putting our money into these mediums and putting our money into movies and toys and all that stuff. And so because we're the gamer culture, we're the gamer audience, now you're seeing more and more of that root its way into our stories, into the way that we like to experience stories, the way we like to experience characters. It's our frame of reference for our lives, which is kind of terrifying. But although games are sort of big, they're not at their maximum saturation point. Once they've got, once we're elderly and there's games for us and games for adults and games for teenagers, it's going to be even bigger than it is right now.
That's a good point. We just all have to get way older and less interested in shooting people, and then games will have to mature.
No, but you're going to say, no, but you're seeing it now. You're seeing retro, so you're seeing HD remixes of games that we grew up on.
Of course, yeah.
Because we want to see that same shit again prettier. Like, you're seeing the same gameplay styles that should have, just evolved past, but we go, actually, we're going to cling to our nostalgia. We want more of that rather than saying, I literally, I'll play a shooter nowadays and I'll be terrible at it, and I go, actually, I'm going to go back to this thing that I liked before where I was good at it, like stuff like that, because I don't have the twitch factor as much. So,
but it's like what happened with manga, like in Japan in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Like it just kind of grew with the audience,
right?
And now they, or at least in the 80s and 90s, they had comics for like everyone, and they still do.
Every genre,
absolutely.
Yeah, like for older people, for older women, for
now,
whatever.
Casual games, or you're seeing games.
But I mean, not in the same. I don't know. I want more.
Sure, but games about games, this sort of weird kind of navel gazing it's totally reflective of the way we're framing our culture, or what we want out of things. It's kind of fascinating in that way.
Well, it's like both of us do comics that are kind of
Gaming.
About games.
Yeah.
In a way. Mine more than yours probably, but
well, mine's more about D&D than yours is more
games.
About video games, but yeah.
Mine's not as much about D&D. It could be. Next time,
all right.
Jim.
That's a promise.
But yeah, we grew up on games. I don't know. It's the fabric of our lives. I've said that before, and it's like that's what Scott Pilgrim became about. And I didn't, like I said, I didn't set out to make it about that. And I just realized as I was going that like all this game stuff is like I have stronger memories of some games that I've played than of some people that I've been friends with for years. And
That's
it's like
the quote right there.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to blow sunshine up your ass for a sec, because what amazed me about Scott Pilgrim was the fact that you took a metaphor for something. So the idea that when we enter into a long-term relationship with someone, we're carrying all the baggage of the previous relationships, and then in order to have a life with someone and move on to a really important and fulfilling relationship, we need to purge the past. You need to not just treat someone like they're an amalgamation of your previous relationships, that you can't just go into someone with all that baggage and say, well, I wish you were a little bit like this person that I liked in high school and a little bit like this person that I dated back then, and I wish you were more like that, or you didn't do that.
Remix culture.
You're always remix culture.
Remix girlfriend.
No, but you're framing it through this reference of gaming where he's defeating the ex-boyfriends, and it's physical, but it's also metaphorical. It's this idea of, in order for them to have a fresh start at the end of the story, he has to defeat all the things that she has built up from her previous relationships. And that is it's unbelievably touching and beautiful. And I'm reading, all those books not knowing that that's where it's going. And in the last book, you just tie it up with a bow, and I was like, fuck you. Fuck you for that beautiful story about something goofy. And everyone had it in their head that it was all pixel punching and coins flying out of shit and all that.
I tricked you.
And then at the very end, it was this very human, very real thing about how we see each other in relationships and how we deal with each other as human beings. And our own fears and doubts destroying our ability to live a happy life. And I was just like, God damn it.
That's the thing. Like I've been interested in relationships and humans and how people kind of like interact with each other. Like, but the only language I know is video games. So and comics. So it's like that's all I could do was like tell the story of what I'm seeing of people in the world through that ludonarrative dissonance.
Well, that's sort of what I was saying. It's like, what you did there, why aren't any games using the stuff that you kind of borrowed from games to do the same type of thing? And I'd like to see some try to do that.
We will carve it out.
In terms of the aging thing, you can definitely tell that like a whole bunch of game developers are having kids right now because like it seems to be the year of the father-daughter relationship in games.
You're seeing that in comics too, though. You're seeing there seems to be a surge of kids in all ages comics that seem to be coming out, because I think a lot of creators are realizing, as much as you might have written a comic or drawn a comic all about, bloodshed and whatever, all of a sudden you go, oh, my young child can't read my own artwork. Maybe I'll do something a little, skew a little younger.
That's where like it shows that comics are kind of still a more mature medium than games, because the way that the game designers are dealing with it's like, let's make a game where I get to protect my daughter by shooting guys in the face.
Yeah. Most mainstream gaming boils down to the same thing. I mean, I guess most mainstream comics do too.
Yeah.
Like, and it's a
There's
different thing.
Superheroes.
Yeah.
They're kind of a thing.
There's superheroes, and then there's like the first person. I'm a gun. Yeah.
I'm a gun.
I'm a
That's
gun.
a great way of putting it.
That is
They're no longer
that's
called
the game
first-person
genre.
shooters.
I'm a gun.
Called I'm a gun.
I'm a floating gun.
I really prefer that name for the genre. Yeah. Even if I'm going to have conversations. I'm going to have conversations while I'm pointing a gun at you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing.
Even in Bioshock, you're holding the
I
gun
always
kind of
love-
like this,
I
like
always
a little
love
bit
when
away.
characters are having really rational conversations while you're like shooting the wall and jumping up and down.
The other thing I was going to say was
like
like Gears of War, when they
Yeah.
go into the cutscenes, they're not really cutscenes, but like you'll be shooting people and then all of a sudden he'll just be like, "Whoa, cell phone." He's just on it right
I
away.
love that. I'll tell you, funny, the first time I ever played Half-Life, the first Half-Life game scared the living shit out of me. So I'm wandering around and it's all sounds and stuff happening elsewhere. And I'm playing on my computer, and the first time Head Crab jumped at me, I just went like this. I went, ah! And so my character went, in real life it would have been like this. And then shot at the ceiling for like 30 seconds while I'm screaming, fucking why? And I was like, I can imagine that in a movie. That would be so awesome. Suddenly the guy stares at the ceiling and he starts firing. Ah! Ah! Ah!
Come on,
It would've been
you can turn that. It's like he fell down.
It would've been the
It's
best
not like he's just
movie.
standing there like this.
It would have been the best movie. Just
You can
like,
turn
so
it into a
good.
story in your
Yeah.
mind.
Can you imagine people in
Use your
movies-
imagination, Jim.
People in movies acting like you do when you're getting bored with a game. You're just like banging into things and breaking furniture while someone's like, "Here's your mission," and they're like really serious with you. It's so
I'm always like jumping on tables and stuff in those games just to try it
just
out.
jackasses.
Half-Life 2 is good for trying to balance things on the heads
Yeah.
of people who are talking. That's really interesting. Let me just get this book on top of your head.
That's also called ludonarrative dissonance.
I know. But it's the best type. So sort of a follow-up question on all of this is, are there certain types of stories that work better in certain mediums? I'm sort of thinking of the Walking Dead game that came out last year, the good one, not the shit one.
Which one's the good one? The Telltale one?
Yeah, the Telltale one. Where I kind of feel like I've watched the TV show, I've read the comics. I feel like kind of the game does what Walking Dead is about better than either of the others do, because it's about difficult choices, and making your own difficult choices is much more difficult and much more like emotionally engaging than watching other people make those difficult decisions.
I don't know. I think it's fascinating though that there's a universality to the concept that works in all three mediums. It's just you sort of have your pick of what kind of experiences you want to have. As a gamer, hardcore gamer yourself, I could see that being obviously your preferred one. My parents would never want to play the video game. They would never want to make those choices.
But I mean, it's also like you said, there's also a shitty Walking Dead game. So it's like it's about like the designer made the right decisions.
Yeah, like in
that
both
one
cases,
would-
assuming that the person is actually competent at what they do and thoughtful about what they're doing, which I think is the case in all three except for the cash-in game.
Yeah, I think that's what everyone's trying to do with all these different mediums, is how to make people really get in and be that person and really experience that story and the emotions and everything that goes along with it. So yeah, The Walking Dead, it is pretty cool that you like get to like make those decisions and you're feeling really, I don't know.
But like honestly, like I turned down Telltale to do a Scott Pilgrim game because I didn't feel like that the adventure game medium was appropriate for Scott Pilgrim's story. And people are always mad at me for that because I just didn't even want to try. But we did the fighting game instead, and that's what I thought would be fun.
Well, I've never seen an adventure game style like The Walking Dead one. Usually it's just like a dialogue tree and you're cruising along. But like the time
Combining
thing is
items
just stresses me out like crazy.
I don't even feel that it is an adventure game. Like it feels like it's something
It's a new
slightly
thing.
different. It's
I
like a
think so.
regret 'em up.
It's
or
not
something.
choose your own. It's choose your own horror. Like it's just like brutal. Like no matter what you do, it's going to be bad, but you can make it different bad.
It's Feel Bad, the video game.
Feel Bad, the video game. Like you're a horrible person. Now choose which way you're going to be horrible. So, but you know what's neat about the comic and the show and the game is that what I love about The Walking Dead is the fact that you take something that is very universal, this idea of survival and this idea of difficult choices. Normally in a dramatic arc, you have really important things happen, and that's where you're going to maximize your tension. So, okay, this really important thing's happening, or this conflict is happening. In Walking Dead, eating is a conflict. You know, like we need gas for the car because there's no gas because, there's also fucking zombies everywhere. And then you're like, we need to get across the road. Well, there's zombies there. You're like,
But you can make a boring game out of that.
You can, but you're like, I just want to survive. I want somewhere safe. I want a home. I want a relationship. Well, you can't have that because there's fucking zombies everywhere. And so they take what is normally very mundane kind of actions and they turn that into tension points and drama. So then when there's real drama, like crazy, intense things happening, you're turning it up to like 11. So you just, this jittery stress mess. Like people just ask me, they didn't know Walking Dead was a comic, and they say, well, so is The Walking Dead comic good? I said, it's an emotional meat grinder. Like it's literally emotional meat grinding. You read every issue and you hate everyone and you need to see what happens next. You're like, fuck, they're all fucking dead, fuck. And then you next issue, oh God, it's worse. Don't introduce new people, they're just gonna kill them different. No, you know, like.
That seems like that's what Walking Dead is about, which is so different. All those, everything is different because, like, everyone thinks, oh yeah, zombies, you're just like trying to survive against the zombies, but it's all about just like how you deal with the situation. It doesn't even need to be about zombies.
No, and that's the point. The zombies are this ever-present threat, regardless if they're actively attacking anyone. So when someone says, I'm pregnant, it's like all the bigger thing of going, oh God, you're raising a children in the zombie apocalypse. It's far more tension than just like, oh, they're coming at us. Yeah. Like the idea of, how are you gonna, where do we get baby food? What do we do? Like this is, kid cries, what do? Keep the kid quiet? Kill the kid or run? Like what do we, it's everyone's lives on the line. Like there's these tension points that are.
How do I keep that baby loyal to me?
Loyal.
with the decision I make.
Loyal. If I feed them, they will like me. No.
Yeah, the baby's like, as the baby gets older, the baby's like, I don't know, you didn't dress me in that shirt I was wanting earlier.
Teen angst in the zombie apocalypse. Wow.
In Brutal Legend, I remember like we were like the RTS thing. Like we were always really, because we had all the different characters, and we really wanted to feel a relationship with all those characters. And so often, like when you just send armies of dudes, you create armies of dudes. You're just like, go forth and just get destroyed. I don't care about any of you people. Like we were like wanting to have a little bit of a relationship. At least, I mean, I don't know if you necessarily care that much about them, but like it was kind of important to kind of really get to know those people and have them be personalities and have each of them be something that you
in
get to know.
XCOM, where you can name all the soldiers, my friend would name all of his friends, and then he'd like call you up and he'd go, "You died last night." I'm like, dude, you're fucking weird. Why would you do that? It's like, yeah, I killed her. I had to go on to my old classmates because all my friends are dead now in XCOM. I'm like,
that's what we want in all in all forms of narrative. Like it's a connection like that.
Yeah.
And I always love naming characters in games.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing in RPGs.
See, I would always, when I was playing RPGs, I would just name them like their job. So it'd be like, if it was the karate
Are you
guy,
a robot?
He would be Punch Mo. And if it was the cleric, it would be Heal Mo. And then it was like Sword Mo, which would piss me off because if I got a really good axe, I'm like, fuck, now Sword Mo's got an axe. This sucks. He's all wrong. He's against his nature.
I think Sword Mo was probably bombed on that name. He's like, that's all you think of me, dude. I'm just the sword guy.
Yeah.
Don't you want to have so much
so
more?
reductive.
And first time I ever played Disgaea, I did them all those names. And then, of course, you can reincarnate them as something else. So it got really surreal because Sword Mo was like a wizard and like then a creature, and I was like, oh God, you used to be a Sword Mo. What's going on?
Sword Mo's grown up.
So I don't know if you guys have had a chance to look at the videos I sent you in the email of the showcase games. We have a bunch of games over at the TCAF main space that were curated that are all games that use some element of comics in their game design as sort of inspiration from around the world. And so you should all go and check them out if you haven't yet. They'll be there tomorrow as well. A lot of them sort of have things where you're sort of manipulating panels around to sort of change what the story is. They're interactive in sort of a way that really like connects with the comics medium. And I'm wondering, like, with sort of the rise of the iPad and digital comics and such, do you guys think that there's sort of a future in that type of thing, that might become like its own genre somewhere between games and comics?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think I forget the names of all the games now, but like being able to rearrange panels and do all that kind of stuff. There's something that I think those games do where reading comics, you think about this stuff anyway, like these what-if scenarios, and it's often an exercise, like, as someone who draws comics, it's something you sometimes do when creating a comic, and to see that as a gameplay element, you think, we should have thought of that a long time ago, that's awesome. And when something as simple as the one where you're trying to run along a wall and get an axe and not get stabbed and use a ladder and exit the panel, and then seeing how everything gets disassociated and mixed around, and you realize, that's what's supposed to happen. I find that it's this really cool thing where I don't look at comics the same way now after even just watching the video. I go, that's really neat. Like, we should be doing this all the time. Like, I want to make a comic where you have to build it all yourself. And I know people have done all that kind of stuff before, but interactive storytelling is what a lot of games are about, and this is almost like a literal like punch in the face. Hey guys, interactive storytelling, like I'm not joking around here. There's a way to do this, and there's things that you can do. When you see that as both gameplay and technique, like all bald-faced like that, I find it really neat and go, okay, I want to see this stuff propagate, to a lot of other places.
I think the weirdest thing for me is there are these, I don't know if you've ever seen a motion comic.
Yeah.
It's pretty much the worst thing ever. It's like bad animation meets a comic I can't control. It's just the worst. And so when you sent those videos, I was terrified. I was like, please don't be like bad motion comics, which is just like we couldn't afford animation. So, right. But here there was gameplay elements were really incorporated far more integrally into what was going on, and that's really fascinating stuff because comics are so universal that the idea of paneling is now, you don't have to explain that to people, which is kind of nice. So I think it's fascinating that the idea that we also have so much screen space that we can do windows within windows, sub-windows, and those are viable for us to be able to see those spaces and interact with them rather than feeling like most games before were just use the maximum area for the primary view.
Right.
And now with high def and everything else, you can go deeper.
Yeah.
More detailed.
Seeing the game, was it Storyteller? Is that the one?
Which one?
Where you there's a goal for the story and then you.
Yeah, that's Storyteller.
Okay, so Storyteller was amazing to see because you should totally play it because it's such an amazing concept of it basically feels like a children's learning game where it's like make a thing happen and you're using basically pictographs to do that and you go, this is the thing kids use to learn about ideas and emotions and friendship and like don't stab your brother, all that stuff.
Except that they learn about like suicide and heartbreak and things like
which
that.
they should learn about anyway. That's why I don't have kids. But seeing that, you go, that's incredible because you suddenly, I feel like you learn a lot by doing that and you realize, oh yeah, like this is a neat thing to suddenly ask me to make this happen and because I bet you there's a lot of great scenarios and I'm not sure how the game addresses this, but where maybe you're not right in the head and maybe your version of how that should play out is actually not the way the game designer intended. So when you say like, oh, so-and-so needs to make so-and-so happy, you're like, well, of course they just put a chainsaw in the middle and some rabid badgers and that would make me happy. And actually, you know what? Storytell's a psych test. That's what I'm trying to say, yeah.
I did watch a small child play it today and just sort of randomly set things up.
Yeah.
So like these people are now in love and that person's dead and the two people are surprised about them being dead.
It's like Scribblenauts too, where you just see people make their own narratives out of that stuff.
But it's sort of like storytelling Scribblenauts, yeah.
Did you ever, as a kid, did you ever have friends, which sounds really sad, but did you ever have friends and... No. Okay, cool. And you drew those...
Will you be my friend?
Of course.
Okay.
Do we get turkey sandwiches later? That's all I want to know. You ever make like a large sheet of paper and everyone starts drawing like a gigantic scene together, and then eventually you probably end up fighting because you're like, no, this guy's going to...
You have stickman armies.
Yeah, and this guy's going to nuke this guy and whatever. But I feel like seeing stuff like that is... I did those all by myself. Well, yeah.
He didn't have friends. That's what he's trying to tell you.
We can do this. We'll do this right now. They're on this table.
Stickman army. Let's go.
But I feel like that's sort of basically like exploring a narrative and building it as you go along and having that's what Storyteller reminded me of. And I thought that was super exciting because I'm like, why have I not done that since I was 8 years old? This is the coolest thing ever. So.
But I think that's true of most art and storytelling, where as a child, there's a fearlessness to tell stories or create things.
Right.
And then there's I don't know what age it is, but you hit a certain point where you're supposed to be good at it, and then you're allowed to be an artist. And if you're not good at it, then you got to stop.
Yeah.
Or you get told there's this overwhelming cultural sense of, oh, you don't draw.
Yeah.
You can't, and you see people, they still draw like children, but they're embarrassed by it and they're frustrated by it, so they stop. Same thing with music, same thing with a lot of art, where I think there's this sense of there's this cultural impasse of you are meant to do that or you are not doing that.
Yeah.
And I think it's really unfortunate.
I think it's stupid.
Yeah.
Because it's like if something like sports, like if you're bad at it, people will just be like, try harder.
Right.
But like it should be the same with art, because it's not all about your innate talent when you're 5 years old. It's like you have to work at it either way. So I think it should be treated more like athletics.
Well, and what's fascinating about that as well is that I'll see a lot of people come to me at conventions and they'll say, oh, I always wanted to make comics. And I'll say, you can.
Yeah.
You should.
You should do it right now.
You can do it and I know in their mind they say, well, they want to be published and they want to be successful and they want to make money at it. And that's sort of this underlying desire. And you have to say, okay, you have to be doing it without those goals in mind, and then it may happen later. But if you don't do it at all, then those other goals will never come true either. So you have to be doing it for yourself first. And drawing in
First, you
particular.
have to love it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think game creation or any kind of art is the same way. I think a lot of people will look, and people here in the audience or whatever, they may look and they go, oh man, I always wanted to X. And you're just like, you can do that. You can do that thing. You know?
Yeah, I think games are in the unique place where like people also have the fear of programming. So it's like, I couldn't program. That's like some
they've become
crazy
so much
genius
more
thing.
accessible in the last few years. Like when I was a kid, I would write my own like text parser games and stuff, and I was super into it. But there was a threshold that I couldn't cross. Yeah. There was a gap between my like little experiments and like a real game. So I just gave up after a while.
Well, people are also encouraged. I mean, it was also because it was a bit of a hobbyist mentality too at the time. But people were encouraged to do that more. And then there was a thing where it was like, no, this isn't a real thing now. So you're either in or you're out.
Don't do it.
But I mean, like here at Bento and seeing everyone here making games who maybe weren't doing it as of 6 months ago and are now publishing games and doing their own stuff. You know, when I tell my students, when they say, oh, I want to do this, like, well, get on it. Hurry up. Like,
like I feel like it's become as accessible as doing comics, like the indie game space.
And actually, like again, seeing something like Storyteller, which kind of combines those two ideas, like you basically get to make a little game happen,
right?
And you get to make a little comic happen. It's super. It's an empowering situation, even though it's pretty much a call response between the designer and the player.
Right.
But it doesn't feel like that because you go, I totally did this. I don't know. I find it like a little bit magical.
It makes small depressing comics the game.
Yeah.
Nice. But do you know what's also weird about? Sorry, did you jump in? Okay. What's fascinating about the comic thing as well is that now with webcomics in particular, you don't even have to worry about the publishing hump as much where well, how am I going to get it out to people? Well, there's this thing called the internet. There's a couple people on it.
I've heard that's a thing.
They do a thing there. So you can put your stuff up online and then it's sort of like it can grow organically or you can try stuff out. You know, there's this experimentation space. One of the things that's both amazing and terrifying to me is something like a DeviantArt where when I used to draw in my own sketchbook and I would show people that I trust, now everyone puts everything online. So you as an artist will grow an incredible amount over 5-10 years, but everyone gets to see all your developmental work, which is both inspiring because you can go, oh, that person used to suck and now they're really good. But it's terrifying because you're also like, now you can see, it's like I pulled up my skirt and you're all looking at me like it's
like it's like a weird reality show 24/7.
Yeah, it is. Like everyone's developmental work.
Watch me struggle.
You look at a webcomic like Questionable Content by Jeff Jacques, and the first strip looks like he did it with his elbow. and I love Jeff. He's a great guy. He's a friend of mine. But his new stuff looks quite good, competent, well put together. And you can look at every single step in between. And in my mind, I would not have.
Same with Penny Arcade.
I would
not
have
early
the
strips
courage.
of like dog shit.
Yeah, I would never have had the courage to put that up. I would have been like, oh, it's not good enough, or I would have immediately deleted it. The minute it went up, because I'd be like, as soon as I got better, I go, well, I'll never show them that old shit again.
Yeah, the thing about games too is that it's especially now that indie games, like you say, become more accessible and more people are doing them. Is like the idea is that just make it happen. Like
what we're trying to say is your first thing's going to suck.
Yeah, but it's going to be glorious.
It's going to suck long.
But either you're trying or you're not.
But you'll eventually make non-suck.
I think we're at the end of our time.
Yeah, we're actually over at this point. I have more questions, but I think this has been a good panel. It's worked.
Sweet.
I did want a fist fight, and I'm sad one didn't happen. Oh, wait. I have one last question.
Oh, is this the one
Will you fist fight? Is that the question? Is
So comics versus game, who would win in a fight?
Games.
Fucking
Would it change anything if the fight was in space?
Maybe like the abstract concepts of comics and games.
Yeah.
You guys
like
require electricity.
Comics are probably heavier than games. So like if it was physical media, comics could win.
What if comics was a ninja?
But games could interface with other games.
With one of my books.
Games would definitely win because games are like there's way more ninja games than ninja comics. We got.
What?
Games are probably more violent overall.
Have you seen anime?
Games are so rich too. They got a lot of money they can spend. They could buy an army.
All right, they can
army of
buy a
ninjas.
comic. It's true.
Space ninjas. Like we've done that. Games have done that.
Yeah.
So we win, but not on artistic merit.
There you go.
You don't need artistic merit when you're dead.
So thanks for coming out.